Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Z Talks with your host, Zaria Musgrove, where I talk about books, movies, TV shows, places, and things that relate to history and the world around us. Now, today, I will be talking about a book that took me around 10 months to actually bring to the podcast, which is Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. I actually read this book last year, September 2025, but it has taken me all of these 10 months to figure out how to approach this book review, book commentary, book analysis, because I will be doing all of those things in this episode. Now, granted, it didn't take me all of those 10 months to figure this out. I have been reading other books in this time, but in the back of my mind, I was like, Grapes of Wrath, gotta talk about it at some point, and the point is now. So I will try to touch upon everything that John Steinbeck tried to achieve in this book, which is a lot. So I will try to cover it as best as I can and do an episode as worthy as this book. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, The Grapes of Wrath is widely known as John Steinbeck's magnum opus, his big one, the one that he poured all of his heart and soul into. And as for me, an avid John Steinbeck reader, I kind of agree. I will say kind of for now because I will explain my thoughts later. But in terms of the writing ability of this book, the writing style of this book, even on that alone, I can definitely say that this is one of his best books. I don't think I would say it is his best because for me, his best book for me will always be East of Eden. But in terms of for his standard, I would think that this is his best book because of what he achieves in terms of commentary. He makes a lot of political commentary in this book in terms of referencing to historical events and just the sheer writing ability that he portrays in this book. Those three aspects he really excels in this book. Plot wise, I like it, but it's not my favorite plot by him. I think East of Eden wins that, but as an author wise, this is the one. So I will go through all of those three aspects that I just mentioned starting right now with the plot and the characters. So just we can get a lay of the land and understand what's happening in the Grapes of Wrath. So this book starts off with the main character, well, not the main character, but well, I would say the main character because he's the character that we meet first. His name is Tom Joad, and he just was released from prison for killing a man. He was in prison for a while. He got released and he's returning home to Oklahoma to just return to his family, get reacquainted when he is met with the stark reality that his home is not as he left it because his family is actually in the process of packing up and moving to California at the moment that he meets them. And the reason for this is because his family is a farming family, and the last few crop yields that they've been met with have been really bad. And they have not been able to pay off their loan to the bank because of their bad crop yields, which is why the bank is now repossessing the all of the land from their farm as well as the lands from all of their neighbors' farms as well, because a lot of their neighbors have also taken loans from the bank in order to pay off the bad or just to get them through the bad crop yield years, believing that they would have better crop yields in the future. But this is not to be the case, so a lot of people default on their loans, and since their land was used as collateral, it is repossessed. Now, the reason why these families are not able to meet these loan repayments is because this is the era of the Dust Bowl. There is a lot of historical context and a lot of recent history in the era of John Steinbeck when he's writing this book, because he writes this book, well, he publishes this book in 1939, and it directly reflects recent history because the Dust Bowl, which is the phenomenon that is affecting the fictional characters in this book, but also a lot of real American families in the 1930s, is a series of dust storms that just wreck the soil. And it's also accompanied by prolonged periods of droughts, which just kills crops, which is people's livelihoods at this point for their money and even people just what they eat on a day to day basis. And as in the book, people take loans to see them through these tough times, but they are unable to replay it because of them not having money to make from their farm. So a lot of people are forced off of their land, which is another phenomenon which is shown in this book, which is a mass exodus of people from the states, mainly of Oklahoma, Arkansas, Texas, and there is another, Missouri. Mainly those four places, but a lot of places in that area where the Dust Bowl affects them. But there's a mass exodus of people from the Dust Bowl belt, which is what it's called, to the West, mainly California. And this phenomenon is further just backbreakingly coupled with the Great Depression, because the 1930s is honestly a terrible time in the US. You have the Dust Bowl and also the Great Depression, which is a severe economic crisis. Some might argue the most severe economic crisis that has faced the US at that time. So you have a lot of families just facing financial hardship and also facing a hardship of livelihoods, especially in the agricultural sector, because this time is also a time of industrialization. So farming is moving from the the way of, people plowing the land by hand and, doing a hard day's back-breaking work. That is changing. The farming industry is also changing at this time to being more mechanized. So you need less farm hands, less people doing labor. So you have these factors coming together: the Great Depression, the natural disaster of the Dust Bowl, but also the the mechanization of everything coming together and just creating a lot of hardship for farming families in particular, which is what John Steinbeck specifically focuses on in this book. And in focusing on this, in this historical, which for him is not even historical, because publishing a book in 1939 about this topic, like, it literally happened, like, it's people are still being affected by it at the time that he published his book, because it was at the peak in the mid 1930s. So it's like, it's like publishing a book about COVID right now. Like, it just happened, so people it's still raw and fresh for people when he publishes his book. So bearing that in mind, the themes that he talks about in this book, through looking at this family traveling from Oklahoma to California because they've been evicted off their lands and they're looking for work. The themes that he looks at are so pertinent for the time, and one of the main one he focuses on is workers' rights. So the family, as they're traveling, the Jode family, as they're traveling from Oklahoma to California, the main thing that they're doing is looking for work in every town that they pass by. And this is a common phenomenon because they see that they are not the only family that's doing this. At this time, historically, I think around 2.5 million people migrated to the West. Not mainly because of the Dust Bowl, because of all of those factors that I listed before. Great, the Dust Bowl, the mechanization, the Great Depression, like all of these factors led to internal migration factors in the US and a lot of it going to the West. So the Joad family in the book realized that they're not the only family that's moving from the farm. And they're in this large motorcade of cars. So, them looking for work, they realize that other people are looking for work around them as well, which leads to them not finding work because there is a massive oversupply of labor, a massive oversupply. So any job that even happens to be available, it is immediately taken by someone who is desperate to feed their family and get money to buy food to just survive. And even when the Jode family does find work, the main issue that they encounter is exploitation and being underpaid, which is something that John Steinbeck really focuses in on this book. The fact that just because the employers know that there is a whole bunch of workers that they could easily refill you with, they underpay you and give you terrible working conditions. And it's something that continually happens to the book where even their wages are cut drastically out of nowhere for no reason other than that the employers just want to save costs and that they can. And that is something that's also stressed in the book. The fact that hardship is not just due to the Dust Bowl, which is in some way a natural disaster, but it's also mainly due to man made factors. He really stresses the man made factors as the reason for these people's hardship, stressing capitalism, corporate greed, and just exploitation and people's lack of care for others for being the reason why the Jode family is being treated so harshly. And it's something that is very, I would say it's left leaning politics. It's his politics is really showing in this book through the themes that he focuses on and the main character Tom Joad, because as he's working in one of his jobs, he tries to mobilize the workers around him, and he really tries to advocate for living wage and workers' rights and to be able to have breaks for work, because a lot of the time they overwork the people, and if you stop working then they assume that you're lazy and that you're not working, and that they could replace you immediately. So these themes are definitely left leaning politics that reflect John Steinbeck's personal politics as well as the politics of the time. Because at this time, you also have the US President FDR, who is pushing a new economic plan called the New Deal, which is supposed to be very socialist in some aspects and provides people emergency workers assistance. And he sets up this workers administration program which provides around like 8.5 million jobs to people. So it's a very liberal time where you have the government providing welfare and providing help. And John Steinbeck really starkly contrasts the government as being like this big help and this big hand with just being living in the workers' camps. Because as the Jode family is moving from Oklahoma to California, they kind of live in these Hoovervilles, which is just temporary rest stops along the way to California, as well as living in workers' camps at the work sites that they work for. And the conditions of these Hoovervilles and these work camps are terrible in comparison to a government owned camp that is free for entry for people to enter and to just live and find work. And the conditions in these camps are hospitable. They are showing the government in a good light in the book, which is showing them as almost like a father, paternalistic, really helping, just showing how the government's there for welfare. But then it also shows the other side of how this is not long lasting. Because what was interesting to me is that even though they found a place to live in the government camp, it was only for a temporary period. And this is something that I picked up on how even though they find work in the government camp, it's not enough to make them survive for a long period of time, which stresses the point that the government assistance at the time that Steinbeck is writing this book is only temporary measures. They're not long lasting measures. They are meant to encourage people to go back into work, which at the time is, yes, helpful, but for the Joad family, not completely what they need, because they need enough to get back on their feet. But for them, it's not enough, which is why they leave. So even though Steinbeck is showing his left leaning politics in this book and pushing for workers' rights, you also see at some points his critique of the current government, even though he's praising it as being a favorable option to the workers' camps and the exploitation that the Jode family faces. He's also critiquing it at the same time with its limitations and how it could be better. So, as you can see, what I just word jargoned for the last 5 to 10 minutes was a lot, because this book is a lot. John Steinbeck really does layer a lot of things on in this book with the historical angles as well as the political commentary, and all of this coming together kind of had the book have a polarizing reception. Now, I've never really looked before at a lot of the books that I've reviewed in the past on how they were received at the time. But with this book, I felt like I had to, because he published it at a time that was so close to what he was writing about. And I was just intrigued as to how this book would have been received. And as you can expect, it was polarizing. Some people absolutely hated the book. Some people branded John Steinbeck as a communist because of his support of workers' rights and the commentary that he made about capitalism and corporate greed in the book. And his book actually was banned in a lot of states, and they had public book banning sessions of his book, which I found insane. So his book was polarizing to say the least. So whilst you had a lot of people hating this book, burning it and banning it, there were also people that recognized that what this book was trying to say about the struggles that this fictional family faced in terms of hunger and finding work and being exploited for wages and being kicked off the land and just breaking apart slowly as a family unit due to these external pressures was true to the time, and it was much needed. So people saw this as John Steinbeck's magnum opus, which is how we now come to my thoughts. So for me, as I said, I do think this is his best work, but I wouldn't put it as my favorite book of his just because of accessibility. I think that the writing style of this book is not very accessible. There are chapters of the book where the narrator kind of shifts to above the book, like omnipresent narrator, but in a way where it's almost like you're a fly on the wall. I can't quite explain it. It's in a way where it's almost like, yeah, you're like a fly on the wall. You're just watching a scene happen with no context, because John Steinbeck would literally place you in a scene with absolutely no context, and you figure out what happened in the previous chapter in a chapter where you were back with a character, and they would mention something and you'd be like, oh, that's what that last chapter was about, where we were just like, so for an example, there's two chapters in the book, one going back to back. There's one chapter where you're in an automobile shop and you're hearing people like talk about repairs, and you're like, who, what's happening? Like, why am I in an automobile shop? Like, why are people talking about car repairs and buying a car? Like, what's going on? And for the whole chapter, which is really short, like these chapters that he does this is like maximum 10 pages. So you're just in this chapter kind of confused. And then in the next chapter, you find out that the family bought a car and that it was actually from the point of view of the car salesman selling the car to them. So you're dropped into a scene in the point of view of characters you've never met before and just kind of figuring it out as you go along, but given the full context of it later on, which is brilliant if you read the book again. And I think that this is one of those books that you can't just read once. I do intend to read Grapes of Wrath again in the future because it kind of begs that of you to read it again, having all the context so that you can appreciate it better. But reading it the first time is really challenging, and it asks a lot of you to give your full focus. It's not a book that you can just breeze through. You have to be intentional about reading it, and it's slow in some parts. You have to stick with it. And the payoff is good. I do think that the plot is really good, but you have to stick with it. And for me, that is the reason why I would say it's his best book, because he really pushes himself artistically with his writing style. But I wouldn't say it's my favorite book because I couldn't just hand this book to anyone. There's some people that I wouldn't even recommend this book to because it would just frustrate you if you don't really want to read it. Like, you have to want to read this book, which is why I personally rate this book 4 out of 5. I know that might anger some people. The book is amazing, but personally, I rated 4 out of 5. Professionally, I rated 5 out of 5 because this book warrants it because of just the artistic boundaries that are pushed. It warrants 5 out of 5 stars. But personally, East of Eden is 5 out of 5 for me, and this is 4 out of 5. So, yeah, that's what I think about Grapes of Wrath. I think if you're up to the challenge, definitely read this book. It is, it's almost like you need to read it in the English literature class, is what I think. When I read this book, I definitely thought to myself, I wish I was back in English lit where we could dissect this book properly and go through all of the metaphors and the writing style and like what's happening here. It's definitely one of those books where you feel like you're back in school. It's not really a reading where you're like, this is just for leisure. It can be for leisure, but you need to put the work in. So, yeah, those are all my thoughts about Grapes of Wrath. As I said, 4 personally, 5 professionally, because this is a good book. But let me know what you think in the comments, what you're rating this book, and who you would recommend to, because up until now, I don't know what type of person I would recommend this book to. Maybe I do know. Mainly an academic person that would appreciate this and put the work in to read this book. Yeah. If you have just graduated uni or you're in uni, I could recommend this book to you. But if you're just reading books for giggles, probably not. So, yeah, that is all I have to say about Grapes of Wrath today. I hope you appreciated the episode, and I hope that you read this book and now have some additional historical background, some knowledge of the political time, and some knowledge of John Steinbeck's politics and what he was trying to say, so that if you do take up the challenge of reading it, you find it a bit easier and have some knowledge that can frame your thinking. And that is my main hope, that what you came away from with this episode. So, thank you for watching. If you want to see more episodes, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. If you want to see some casual book reviews, 60 seconds or less, you can head over to the C Talks with RM socials. But if not, you can stay around for the next episode of C Talks.